I'll switch for that. Okay, in this unit we're going to learn the regular preterite endings for AR and ER and IR verbs. And in the new book, this is 202. In the old book, it was page 207. Okay, now first let's look at the AR verb endings. That's these six right here. A, asti, o, amos, astis, arum. For example, if I want to say, I walked in the park, yo camine in el parque. Caminar is my verb, it's an AR verb. Yo form, you take the stem and you put your E. Or I might ask you, did you walk in the park? Caminaste en el parque? I want to say, my dog walked in the park. Mi perro caminó en el parque. Or I might say, my dog and I, we walk in the park. Mi perro y yo caminamos en el parque. Or I want to say, the neighbors walked in the park. Mis vecinos caminaron en el parque. That's how I use the ending, stem plus the ending. Okay, and there is a little bit of a sort of nasty nursery rhyme that you can use to help you remember the endings. And so you start with Little Miss Muffet, and the ET in French is pronounced A like buffet, and Muffet, if you pronounce it with the French pronunciation, is Muffet, which is the same as this. So Little Miss Muffet sat on her aste, eating her curds and oh. Along came Amos and sat down beside her, and now she's no longer a Ron. We didn't get the astes in there, we got the others. Okay. So there's your little nursery rhyme. Let's go to the ER-IR verbs. These endings are relatively similar to the AR endings, but these are used for ER and IR verbs. For example, comí ayer por la mañana. I ate yesterday morning. Comiste tú ayer? Did you eat yesterday? Él comió ayer. He ate yesterday. Nosotros comimos ayer. We ate yesterday. Ustedes comieron ayer? Did you guys eat yesterday? There's the ER verb comer. Let's use an IR verb. Abrir, to open. Yo abrí la ventana por la noche. Open the window in the night. Abriste tú la ventana? Did you open the window? Él abrió la ventana. He opened the window. Nosotros abrimos la ventana por la noche. We open the windows at night. Or I might say, they opened the windows. Ellos abrieron las ventanas. So I do my stem of abrir plus my endings, and that's how that I get that in the preterite. And these endings are for the AR verbs, and these six here are for both ER and IR verbs in the preterite. In this unit, we're going to learn how to conjugate the irregular yo form for some AR verbs. Here I have the verb tocar that ends in a CAR. And you notice that I have the regular endings for all of them except the first one. And I've got TOQUE. And the reason for that is, if I follow that C with the E, that's the yo ending for AR verbs in the preterite, I don't have toque, which is what I want to say. Toque la piano. Or toque el piano. I play the piano. If I follow that C with the E, it's not toque, but it's tose. It changes the pronunciation of the C. And I don't want tose. I want toque. So I have to spell it different to make it be pronounced right. And that's true for verbs that end in CAR, GAR, and ZAR. Here's a CAR verb, that changes to QU to get toque. And here's another verb, sacar, the yo form of that changes to QU. Sake for sake la basura, I took out the trash. If it's a G, you change the G to a GU. For example, here's the verb yegar, I arrived. If I just go L-L-E-G-E, that's yehay. And I don't want to say yehay, I want to say yegay. So to get my hard G sound, I change that G to a GU, and I get yegay again, which means I arrived. The verb cruzar is my next one. It has a Z at the end of the stem. And the Z is going to change to a C, only in the yo form. So that would be cruce instead of cruze. Okay, so if it's a C in the yo form of an AR verb in the preterite, the C changes to a QU. The G at the end of the stem, as in yegar, will change to a GU, but only in the yo form. The Z at the end of the stem, as in cruzar, will change to a C, but only in the yo form. Again, this is page 203 in the new book. In the old book, it was page 208. This unit is a subset of ER and IR verbs in the preterite. In the new book, this is on page 206. In the previous book, it was on page 210. There are two units on that page. There are IR stem change verbs and ER and IR verbs that have a stem that ends in a vowel. Let's start with the IR verbs that are stem change verbs. I have three of those here. I have preferir, servir, and dormir. Your book has 4 or 5 others, but let's look at the stem changes that are involved in these three. In the present tense, preferir is an E to IE verb, prefiero, prefiere, so forth. But in the preterite, it's E to I in the third person forms. Servir in the present tense is E to I. It's also E to I in the third person forms of the preterite. Dormir in the present tense is O to UE, duermo, duermes, etc. And in the preterite, it's O to U in the third person forms. Now, coincidentally, these verbs do the same thing in the third person preterite forms that they do in their present participles, and for the same reason. Let's look, for example, at dormir that we have here on the board. You see this third person singular ending is I and O, that's 2 vowels. And we see the third person plural ending, it's IERON. And these two endings are like the IENDO for ER and IR verbs in the present participle, the ING form. And they do the exact same thing in the present participle that they do in the third person forms. Preferiendo, preferring, serviendo, serving, dormiendo, sleeping. But in the preterite, that U only shows up again in these third person forms. So let's look at our example here, dormir. Dormi, I slept. Dormiste, did you sleep? Dormio, el dormio, he slept. Ella dormio, she slept. Usted dormio, you slept. Dormimos, no you. Dormistes, no you. Third person plural, we're back to the you again. Dormieron, for they slept. Ellos dormieron, or ustedes dormieron. Ustedes durmieron bien? Did y'all sleep well? Okay, now, this group again, they're all IR verbs, and all of these verbs do some sort of stem change in the preterite. Some are E to IE, some are E to I, and some are O to UE. Now, in the preterite, they only do 2 forms. You can see the switches here. All the ones that have an E go E to I, and all the UE ones go to U. The other one that's like dormir is morir. I don't think it's in your book, but there are some other ones that do the E to I switch. And so, you have to look especially for subjects that would get a third person conjugation of the verb, because that's where the odd change in the stem occurs in the preterite. Okay, the other section on page 210 in the old book, or 206 in the new book, also has verbs that have odd third person forms in the preterite. This category is ER and IR verbs that have a stem that ends in a vowel. For example, in your book you have laer, creer, and oir. Oir is an IR verb, the stem is a O, that's a vowel. Creer is an ER verb that ends in an E for the stem. Laer is an ER verb with an E that ends in the stem. And I'm giving a couple of other examples of verbs that do the same thing over there. I've got distribuir and construir, to construct and to distribute. And these verbs do something very similar, or almost identical really, to what these other 3 verbs do. Now let's talk about the conjugation of these verbs and the oddities about them. Now, these verbs do the same thing that laer did in the present participle. You remember we were just talking about the present participle with the verbs on the other part of the page, the IR verbs are stem change verbs in the present tense. And in the present participle, and laer goes to legendo with a Y. And that's to avoid having 3 vowels in a row. And you have the same issue in the third person form, just like you did with the other verbs. And so to avoid having 3 vowels in a row and the third person singular and third person plural, you change the I in the ending to a Y. You get leyo and leyero, changing the I to a Y, just like you did with the present participle. These 2 verbs, creyo, creyerum, third person forms, oyo and oyerum for the third person forms of oir, distribuyerum, distribuyo for the third person forms of distribuir, and so forth. Now, besides these Y's, the I changing to Y in the third person forms in the preterite, there are a couple of other minor little things that are easy to miss. You know that there's supposed to be an accent over the yo form for the ending here, but usually you don't have one in the 2 form. And with these verbs, you also need one in the 2 form and the we form, because if you don't, then the 2 vowels you have there will diphthong. Instead of leiste, which is what I want here, I get leiste. And instead of leistes, over here I would have leistes. Instead of leimos, which is what I have here with the accent, I would have leimos. E and I would combine. They would diphthong and turn from two separate vowels to two vowels that combine together to make one sound. So I have extra accents in the to form and in the we form for these verbs that you don't normally see with other preterite forms.